with corporate activism. I want to tell a short story and then explain my stance as far as Google is concerned. The company has, maybe through an unforced error, maybe not, that remains to be seen, but the company has shown, literally shown its cards, and it has shown that it is willing to let corporate activists within its ranks determine its product roadmap, and that is, in other words, Google is has a corporate mission which is not aligned with what people are actually doing. That has a couple of risks. In general, it's of course always difficult for investors to analyze companies that have different agendas than the ones that they state. But more importantly, I think it's a canary in the coal mine. It shows that there's much deeper problems with Google and in general also with Silicon Valley. Now, how that's going to pan out, of course, I don't know. Peter Thiel calls it totalitarian AI. The question whether technology and technology leadership can even sustain a lack of cultural integrity. In other words, can these companies survive, make money, and still be dominant, even though they have a cultural misalignment? That remains to be seen. My gut's telling me no, and that's why I'm going to start with this short story. And the story starts in Pittsburgh. We visited Pittsburgh probably about 15 years ago. We were there on a trip to visit some people at Carnegie Mellon and some companies. ANSYS is actually a very good, interesting company that does, physics animation. So we visit those companies, and we just, whenever we're in a city, you like to kind of read a little bit about the history of the city. You like to understand, talking to locals, what's going on. And what was going on back then was that Heinz was sold. Heinz, the ketchup company, has been sold to a private equity company. And people were upset because a lot of entitlement sort of spending went away. Without going too much into details, you had private schools, losing customers. You had golf clubs and country clubs not being able to sustain their high rates because the people who frequented those types of establishments were hired and worked at Heinz in jobs that really had no value added. And when the private equity firms came, they basically got rid of all of this. And the reason I'm telling this short story is really because I think that's what's going to happen eventually to Google and the rest of Silicon Valley. Whether it's Google or Apple or even Amazon or you name it, it doesn't really matter. I don't have a clear understanding of the cultures of these companies. I have a little bit of an understanding of Google because I know a lot of people who work there, used to work there, and now with this fiasco with Gemini, you can kind of just put the dots together. You can say, look, I mean, this company has a culture problem. It's misaligned. People are basically doing whatever they want inside the company. And what happens is when you don't nurture a culture, when you don't pay attention to the culture of the company, then the culture takes over. And it turns out that Google has been hijacked by an activist woke culture, which has certain agendas, and one of them being to rewrite history. I It's beyond the scope of this episode to maybe explain in detail why it's a bad idea to rewrite history, but I just want to point out history itself has shown that many times when that has happened, whether it's the French Revolution with the Jacobins or the Russian Revolution, that rewriting history tends to end up in bloodshed and bad situations, much worse than the ones that the people who want to rewrite the history want to write. Now, having said that, I do appreciate the willingness of people to change history, to rewrite history, to oppose the status quo. Those are all things that I'm supporting, and it's not even the question whether I'm supporting them or not. It's the only way forward. I was asked today by a lady whether I think AI is good for people, and my answer was, look, we don't have a choice, right? We have to the way our human society works, at least in the last couple hundred years since the Enlightenment took hold, is that it's either forward or it's totalitarian nightmare. Now we have to make sure that that forward doesn't also lead us to the same end goal, which is totalitarian nightmare. And that's part of the reason why people are so upset with Google, is because this is a company which has been nurtured in the freest, most prolific, most progressive place in the world, Silicon Valley. It's become a giant, and now it's turning into a totalitarian, big brothers watching you type nightmare itself. And that, of course, is disappointing. But fundamentally, I want to look at this situation now more from an investor's perspective. And I want to ask myself the question, should I care? Should I be concerned? Or maybe I shouldn't. Maybe who cares whether employees in Google, whether it's people who self-proclaim themselves as the Inquisition, or whether it's people who are actually hired to do this, whether it's the board and the CEO and all these C-suite people who actually want this, or whether this is an accident. It doesn't really matter. I mean, one stance could be, as long as the technology works, as long as people are using the product, and as long as Google is selling advertising based on search and YouTube and all the other products that it has, who cares? So this would be one stance. I disagree with that stance for two reasons. One is it's almost an oxymoron, right? If you're hijacking your product in the name of the ideology, you will have to pay a price, and the price that you want to pay is quality. And when you start paying with quality, sooner or later people do switch to other products. So it's not a good competitive situation to be in. I think the other almost as serious problem, though, is the Heinz problem. The reason I started this episode with Heinz is because it shows how a company can fall sort of through the cracks in its own complacency. Uh, the country clubs and private schools and all of these fancy things that people do in places like Pittsburgh when they work for Heinz. That's what's happening right now in Silicon Valley. It's a bigger scale. It's a little bit more disguised. Such and such private school is being touted as a good STEM school, when in reality it's just another fancy private school with a fancy private club attached to it, and maybe a country club type situation where rich people gather and have the luxury to talk about how to change social misalignments, while of course they're keeping their neighborhood, their school, their garden, and all of that intact. It's socialism for everybody except me kind of thing. So that's what's happening right now with Google. That's what's happening in Silicon Valley at large. So the question now, of course, is from an investor's perspective, what does one do? You could also take the other stance, which is you could say that this is very scary, and that the Google board and the Google, whoever pulls the shots there will have to step in and fix this. We've seen this before. Starbucks was on the brink of collapsing when Howard Schultz came back. We've seen Satya Nadella saving Microsoft from oblivion. We've seen companies also on the other side, by the way, let's say during the George W. Bush 2 years, companies like Halliburton or the whole oil patch was supposed to be invincible, and you were patriotic if you worked for Halliburton and blah blah blah. And as far as I'm concerned, these companies haven't done anything for investors. Don't forget this podcast here. What I'm talking about here is really from the point of view of an investor. So I don't have a political view per se. Maybe you can kind of see where my political stance here is, and I'm going to say it just so it's clear. I'm a libertarian. I am against authoritarian, top-down brainwashing. I am for options. I'm for freedom, and most importantly, I am for error correction. So you can make errors. Google is free to make errors. The importance now is how are they going to fix this error? And I want to say something just sort of as an argument. Imagine that the Google board tomorrow shows up in a press conference and says, we have changed the mission of the company. The mission of the Google company is now to proliferate woke capitalism as embodied in ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is our mission. We want to drive this, and we're going to do it by rewriting history. We're going to do it by making sure that every search that you make is going to diminish the history of the white race and proliferate the alternative history that we are hoping to write. If that is the stance of Google, they have all the right in the world to do that. They can go raise money in the capital markets. They already have money, so they might not have to raise money. They can launch products, and if people are okay with that, we can sort of morph into a society that is dominated by Google. I am also absolutely supporting, let's say, people like Elon Musk, who says, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to do it, and I am supportive of people that if Israeli people think that they need to go and kill Hamas and Hezbollah people to protect themselves, they have all the right to do that. I don't think they should do it on the check of taxpayers' money of the United States and use Western civilization as a pretext to do this, things along those lines. But again, that's a different conversation. I think people have the right to do it. What I'm mostly concerned about in the context of Gemini and Google and in the context of corporate activism is that it's creeping. It's not transparent. It's not open. It's sort of, we have mission X, but we're really doing Y. And sometimes it's even the C-suite doesn't even know about it. There is this episode when Musk took over Twitter and, supposedly Apple wasn't advertising in Twitter and Tim Cook didn't even know about this. We have plenty of examples of companies that are openly saying one thing and then doing another thing. Disney is a good example of a company that, in my opinion, is completely drenched with corporate activism, whether it's woke or whether it's other types of political views. And it's not good for business. That's the main message here. It's not good for business. Again, I am not. You could have a very right-wing or left-wing type company, as long as it's transparent, as long as it's clear what they want to do, and I'm okay with it. I'm perfectly fine with it. But don't try to wash my eyes. Don't try to fog my view. Don't try, and unfortunately, it's a disease that is proliferating throughout corporate America, actually the corporate world. We have companies like Nestle in Switzerland, for example, which is selling fat and sugar and is one of the main reasons for the obesity problem. And by the way, this is the tangent also for bad coffee in Europe and other parts of the world. Going around calling themselves a wellness company. We have healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies talking about curing cancer when in reality they're making money with obesity pills and erectile dysfunction pills and some cholesterol stuff, which might be useful, but certainly is way overpriced and so on and so forth. We all know the pharmaceutical story. My point here is that, what we need as investors, I think it is our job as investors to align the message and the action of companies with their mission and be very crystal clear about what they say they're going to do and then make sure they do it. Errors are allowed. There's no law against errors, and there shouldn't be. Society freedom is defined as an error correction society. But what we can't have is this convolution and this pretense of never making errors, of always being right, and on the other hand, and doing completely the other thing. Yesterday, I spent about an hour listening to an analyst presentation by BMW, and what's hurting me about BMW is the hypocrisy of the management. How they're on the one hand touting that they're somehow green and the digital mobility, and on the other hand, what they're really trying to do is keep pushing ICE cars, keep polluting the world, keep selling the same types of cars that they've been selling before. And to some extent, it's not even to protect the company. It's really just to protect the couple of years that the management still has left in order to collect the bonus, invest the shares, and things along those lines. That's what's really wrong with corporate activism and corporate America, and actually the rest of the world also, not just corporate America. It is this discrepancy between what they say and what they do. And it's the job of us investors to align that. And that's why I feel very strong about it. And Google is, again, it's just the peak of the iceberg. It's unfortunate. I think it's very dangerous. It's bad for Silicon Valley. It's bad for progress. It's bad for AI because it's only going to nurture the fears of totalitarian AI. The fears that are already out there. We don't have to pretend that that there's a risk here. It's already there. What we're doing, we're just throwing oil in the fire of something that is already burning, which is this fear that we have these geeks from Stanford and MIT who are going to take over. I read the novel Deluge, or I can't pronounce that word. And in that novel, there are characters like that, people who have this self-righteous view of changing the world, changing history. It's okay to do that, but be open about it. Be transparent. I don't have a problem if Sundar Pichai tomorrow stands up and says, "I want to I want to rewrite history." It's my prerogative. I can do it because I have the technology. If Demi Sasabi says, "I want to rewrite history," go do it. It's fine. You earned the right to do it. Quite frankly, so that's fine. But don't talk to me about X and then do Y. This is not good for business. It's very, I would say it's dangerous, it's misleading, and again, it's definitely going to lead to a situation, and that's why I started this whole episode with Heinz, to a situation where we have a complacent, fat company that is lost touch with reality, that is not going to be able to deliver the returns that it's promised to its shareholders, and quite frankly, even to its employees. This is not just about capitalists making money. This is about employees nurturing their skills, building careers. If you're a person in Google right now that wants to do the right thing, that wants to work hard and maybe, improve the Gemini model, maybe find better ways to align, foundation models with human feedback, reinforcement learning with human feedback. If you're somebody who is in the research field, if you're somebody that's interested in how to better align reinforcement learning with reality, if all of these things are incredibly important, interesting things to do, interesting, career paths, and then you're being exposed to this corporate activism, which might or might not align with your view, but that's not the point. You didn't go there and work there to become a corporate activist. So the result, then, you have more and more people who align with the corporate activism, who actually go there just to do corporate activism. And I see many young people who are lured into these pseudo jobs that in reality aren't even jobs. They're, again, just corporate activist type jobs. This is just not the place to do it. That's, I would say, in a nutshell, the message here. And again, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And if you're invested in companies, always you have to be unbelievably sharp when it comes to one question: is what they say what they do? And is what they do what I think that I should be doing by investing in that company? Those are the crucial questions that need to be answered. Thank you.